Rosemary Kennedy had a lobotomy when she was 22 years old because her strong father thought she was intellectually disabled and wanted to help her. But new proof has shown the truth is even darker than that. Since Rosemary Kennedy was the oldest daughter of the powerful and well-known Kennedy family and the sister of John F. Kennedy, she should have been American royalty like many of her brothers. She was the family's dirty little secret instead, music. Her terrible death put a dark cloud over the proud American family. Rosemary Kennedy was born on September 13, 1918, in a country that was in the middle of World War I. But Rosemary's home life was very different from the blood and toil of the battlefield. Joseph and Rose Kennedy, her parents, were big names in politics and music. They were looking forward to the birth of their first girl and third child until everything went horribly wrong. One of the other. World events at the time of Rosemary's birth included the terrible Spanish flu, which was killing a lot of people on almost every continent. Doctors were very busy with the flu on the night that Rosemary's mother went into labor, so there was no doctor available to help her through the birth. In a panic, the nurse told Rose Kennedy to keep her legs together while she was in full labor so the baby wouldn't come before the doctor got there. Not much. For more than 2 painful hours, Rosemary's head was stuck in the birth canal, cutting her off from air. The Kennedys may have thought things would get better after the baby came home. As you might expect from a family that raised not only President John F. Kennedy but also 2 senators, Robert and Ted, the Kennedy adults were strict parents who wanted their children to be proper, traditional, and almost perfect. So, music. Picture their fear when little Rosemary started coming up short on having trouble moving even at 2 years old, which is a normal part of growing up. The Kennedys made a cruel choice because they were so focused on keeping up a perfect picture. To keep Rosemary's disability a secret from everyone, they didn't ask for help for her. In which Rose Kennedy told almost no one about her daughter's problems and pretended that everything was going well with her growth. Still, the problems got clearer over time. Rose had a total of 9 children. Soon, their dinner tables were full of teens who were hungry and the usual quick Kennedy chit-chat. But Rosemary was very different at these get-togethers. She seemed confused by the conversation and stayed incredibly quiet. It was true that Rosemary was generally nicer than her brothers. In the past, her mother said, she was so ready to do her best, so grateful for attention, and thanks for the praise. I hope I deserve them. One other thing Rosemary did, though, was make her parents very scared. It was clear to everyone by the time Rosemary was a preteen that she didn't have the Kennedy gift of gab, but she did have their upper-class Irish good looks. A lot of guys wanted to date her younger brothers, especially her next eldest brother John, music. Her bigger brothers had to keep them away. Still, the Kennedys were trying to make Rosemary look nice. Over the years, they had done everything they could think of to make Rosemary look perfect for her launch, without any flaws like a disability. First, they hired private teachers, but it was still hard for them to teach her language skills. But when she was 15, her parents sent her to a convent so she could grow into her beauty. Rosemary had been to private schools before, but her time at the Sacred Heart Convent in Rhode Island was not like any other place. For one thing, it must have been a very lonely situation. Her parents made sure that the nuns taught her in a way that was completely different from the other kids. They likely thought that the one-on-one attention would help their daughter more than a full school, but it's also likely that they wanted to keep Rosemary's problem secret. They tried to hide it in other ways too. Rosemary's parents were still dealing in high society while she was at Sacred Heart Convent. Her brother John was as good of a young man as they could have hoped for. Rose wanted to get both of her brothers out into society more, so she set up for John to go with Rosemary to a tea dance around this time. Rose and Joseph Kennedy were thrilled when someone told Rosemary she didn't look different at all, as long as John was with her and led her through the. In other words, the Kennedys just couldn't accept their daughter for who she was, no matter what that looked like. It was a dark trend that would get even darker. Music. In 1938, Joseph Kennedy, the family father, had just been appointed as the U.S. ambassador to the UK. The Kennedy family was at the top of their social game at this point. Rose and Joseph's plan was for Rosemary to make her appearance to King George V, sixth of the United Kingdom, and Queen Elizabeth, who is also known as the Queen Mother. Rosemary still couldn't read or write well enough for 4th grade, so the strict rules of royal manners were one of the hardest things for her. In particular, palace rules said that she had to do a full and very complicated royal curtsy when her parents introduced her to the king and queen. Rosemary worked on it for hours to get it right. But it didn't work out on the day it was supposed to. Rosemary was nervous because she knew her parents would only take perfection. She walked into the event, stood up to do her curtsy, and almost fell down. She almost fell in front of the monarchs, but they were polite and claimed not to notice. They just stood there with smiles on their faces. The Kennedys were very good at seeing only what they wanted to see, and Rose Kennedy was no different. She never said that Rosemary was almost falling or talked about anything else. The problem in any way. To the point where she thought Rosemary's embarrassing start was a huge success, she told anyone who asked. When the Kennedys wanted to show Rosemary off as a beautiful debutante, they got a lot of attention. But with that attention came questions they didn't want to answer. Now, magazines for the wealthy wanted to write about Rosemary, but Rose and Joseph Kennedy were afraid that any interview their daughter did would reveal her problems. In other words, the family did let some. Rosemary, Rose, and Joseph were in charge of most of the details that the press got about the music. Woman's Day was told that Rosemary was learning to be a kindergarten teacher, while Parents was told that she has a secret desire to be on stage, which was a more humorous answer. The Boston Globe asked Rosemary to do an interview around the same time as these puff pieces. Joseph Kennedy had his assistant write down a letter from Rosemary that said, "I have always had serious tastes. And understand that we are not given life to enjoy it. I've been learning Dr. Maria Montessori's famous psychological method for a while now, and I graduated with my teaching degree last year." Then he had Rosemary carefully copy those words into her own music writing. In 1940, Rosemary was at the top of her game, at least in public. No one could see her private life. But when she got back from a successful start in England, music, something seemed to break. Eunice, Rosemary's younger sister, said that Rosemary, who is 22 years old, seemed to lose mentally and emotionally almost overnight. After that, things got really bad. After Rosemary became a woman, she started to show scary signs. Her family said she started having seizures or at least some kind of spasms that made them scared and confused. She often left them alone, unable to perform. Rosemary's seizures were scary enough on their own, but it seemed like her whole attitude started to change, and not for the better, as her mental abilities got worse. Soon, at least according to her family, she would have violent tantrums and rages over small things, and she would often even hurt family members. Rosemary's family was fed up with her acting up all the time, so they sent her to a summer camp in Massachusetts, music, in the hopes that things would get better. It was doomed from the start. Rosemary was kicked out of school for her continued misbehavior.